Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Dear students, I welcome you back for the course Innovation to Network and Security, code ITNW4109. First of all, I would like to thank the team members, Dr. Salim, Dr. Guru Bhatia, and Dr. Faisal for their untiring efforts in the course. My name is Mubashir and I am from UTES IBRI. So students, today we are going to cover the chapter number 6, which is about the application plane of SDN architecture. We already discussed in the past each plane, like in lecture number 4, we discussed about data plane in detail. Then in lecture number 5, we discussed about the control plane. And now in lecture 6, we are going to discuss the application plane of SDN architecture. So students, we already discussed the architecture and the interfaces. Like if this is the SDN architecture, so here is the data plane down, and then we have the control plane, and here is application plane. We already discussed northbound interface connecting application plane and control plane, and over here southbound interface between control plane and data plane. The network resources reside in data plane, SDN controller in control plane, and in today's lecture we are going to discuss about the application plane. So let's go ahead. So the objective of our this lecture is to present an overview of SDN application plane architecture. So we focus on the application plane, and after that, list and describe 6 major applications of SDN plane. We will discuss what are the 6 major applications. Then define the network services abstraction layer. Very important point. The abstraction, network services abstraction layer. We will also discuss about it. And at last, we will discuss frenetic overview. So these are the objectives that's supposed to be covered in this lecture. Okay. So student, when we talk about SDN application plane architecture, the application plane, which is on the top, it contains applications and services. So what applications we will discuss in the future slides, like application related to the security, application related to traffic engineering, and many more, that define, monitor, and control the network resources and behavior of the network resources. So network sources we already discussed in chapter number 4, that network resources is in the data plane. We talk about physical switches or logical switches, both. And when we talk about the behavior, then network behavior refers to the activities of both the network and the user who operate on it. Then students, these applications in application plane, please, okay, interact with SDN control plane via application control interfaces. Again, these application control interfaces we are going to discuss in the future slides, but make sure that your application plane and your control plane, the interface among between them is our northbound interfaces. Okay. And in detail, we are going to discuss in the future. And for the SDN control layer to automatically customize the behavior and properties of your network resources. So as we know that the application plane interact with SDN control plane. Okay. But in short, it will we will able to customize with the help of application the behavior and properties of the network resources. So such a big role. The programming of an SDN application make use of abstract view. When we talk of abstract view of network resources, we are talking about the conceptual view of network resources, which is provided by the SDN control layer via application control interface. So these are the things. Okay. So now, students, we will discuss the architecture of control plane. So here is the architecture of control plane, in which you can see that we have on the top the user interface, which is at local and remote level. So these are the applications that we are going to discuss. And then network services abstraction layer. And at last down you can see the northbound interfaces, local and remote. Both we are going to discuss. So I repeat, student, this is on the top. This is the architecture of our application plane. And down we have control plane. So student, let's start with northbound interfaces. This portion we are going to discuss now. So the northbound interfaces, when we discuss, student, so what is the role of northbound interface? Before that, let's draw and let's know. So here is your application plane on the top, and down is your data plane. All the resources, your network resources, your switches, your routers, logical switches, or it's a physical switches, are at the data plane, or we already discussed. So students, the northbound interface, here is your control plane in between here. So northbound interface enable applications to access control plane functions. So this interface helps the applications on the top to access the control plane function. The control plane function we already discussed in lecture number 5 in detail, like the shortest path forwarding, security mechanism, topology manager, device manager, like device manager. The responsibility was to configure the switch parameters and the switch attributes to manage the flow table. Okay, so I repeat, northbound interface, it will not allow applications to know the details of underlying network switches. No detail is required. The vendor name, the protocols that are used by the switches. Without it, it can access the control plane functions. So typically the northbound interface provide an abstract view, a conceptual view of your network resources. That it's a switch, it's a router, controlled by the software in the SDN control plane. We already discussed this thing. Now, students, when we talk about the northbound interface, it can be at the local or at the remote interface. When we talk about local interface, the SDN application are running on the same server as the control plane software. So let's draw it and let's understand this concept. When we talk about the interface is local, then the SDN application are running on the same server. So let's see. This is one server, and the same server is running with the control plane and application plane. So then we talk, this is called a local interface. It's a local interface now. Why? Because the SDN applications are running on the same server as the control plane software. Server is same. One server is same. It's one. But when we talk about the remote systems, then the northbound interface, now we need a proper protocol or API, which we discussed REST API, students, in lecture number 5. it will connect the application to the controller on the central server. Okay. Now the central server is not at the same place; it's at a different place, and need to be connected through a remote interface now. It needs a remote interface. So now, students, let's go on. Now, students, we are going to discuss the user interface. Here, you can see in the architecture, we already have gone through the the interfaces. We talk about the interfaces over here. Now we are going to talk about the user interface. So the user interface is the it enables the user to configure the parameter in SDN applications and to interact with the applications. Okay. So two again possibilities. The first possibility is that user is local. Okay. So when we say that a user is local, then it means it uses the application server directly. So uses the keyboard and display on the server and go for the application plane. It can interact with the application plane on the same server, use the keyboard and display. But when we talk about that the user and the application plane, the server, they are far away from each other, then remotely the user has to log on. Remotely has to log on to access the application server. So these are the two things. So after now that we will discuss the next thing.